Chapter 7. Hacking Resilience. How quickly can your supply chain recover? Quote, most companies wait for the boom to happen and then respond, unquote. Johann Gott, co-founder of Prism Advisory Risk Company. Quote, detection is useless without response, unquote. Bruce Schneier, renowned computer security expert and author. Once we have secured the individual parts of our supply chain, we can start to build resilience, the ability to recover from disruption. At this point, it's natural to focus on the why. That's the most interesting part. It's easy to explain why supply chains are broken, but building resilience is significantly harder because we have to get into the details of what is broken and try to fix it. Sometimes these fixes require unwinding decades of investment and ineffective strategies. Often, resilience return on investments is fleeting and becomes more of an insurance policy than a strategic initiative. Regardless, it's time to move resilience conversations beyond why it's important and toward making our supply chains more fault tolerant. 10-word answers. Many days I wake up, open LinkedIn, scroll through my feed and think, for goodness sake, I really hate consultants. The irony of my statement notwithstanding, consultants are very smart people, but oftentimes they fall into professional groupthink, not only among individual firms, but across the entire profession. This can be clearly seen in the topic of resilience. Coming out of the pandemic, every firm developed a perspective on building resilience in the supply chain. Without singling out any firm, if you read the various perspectives from Accenture, Bain, BCG, Deloitte, Kearney, and McKinsey, you'll come away with the following messages. 1. Resilience is important. Act now. 2. Take a resilience stress test. 3. Do better planning and adjust your sourcing strategy. 4. Move/reposition your manufacturing sites. 5. Create a resilient network design. All of these are great suggestions, and they look good on glossy brochures, in white papers, or in slick PowerPoint decks. But they mean very little in practical terms. They're deliberately broad and lack practical applicability. Fans of the television show The West Wing will be struck by the 10-word answers phenomenon as seen in Season 4, Episode 6. During the episode, there's a presidential debate between the fictional president Jed Bartlet, played by Martin Sheen, and meant to represent an idealized version of a liberal intellectual Democrat, and Florida Governor Robert Ritchie, played by James Brolin, meant to be a slick-talking, America-loving conservative and a not-so-subtle jab at then U.S. President George W. Bush. During the debate, the following exchange takes place. Moderator. Governor Ritchie, many economists have stated that the tax cut, which is the centerpiece of your economic agenda, could harm the economy. Is now really the time to cut taxes? Governor Ritchie. You bet it is. We need to cut taxes for one reason. The American people know how to spend their money better than the federal government does. Moderator. Mr. President, your rebuttal. President Bartlet. There it is. That's the 10-word answer my staff's been looking for 2 weeks. There it is. 10-word answers can kill you in political campaigns. They're the tip of the sword. Here's my question. What are the next 10 words of your answer? Your taxes are high? So are mine. Give me the next 10 words. How are we going to do it? Give me 10 after that, and I'll drop out of the race right now. President Bartlet explains that governing is messy, difficult, and that determining right from wrong in the real world is hard. The point of this exchange is to show that it is easy to give a slick 10-word answer, but to get the work done in a high-pressure, volatile, politically contentious environment is difficult. I think it would be fair to use this construct to describe the way building resilience is portrayed by analysts, consultants, and pundits in real-world supply chains. If you read what industry analysts, consultants, and solution providers offer up, it is some variant of a 3 or 5 point plan, the equivalent of a 10-word answer. Again, combining the answers from all the firms, one gets a picture that resilience requires some combination of people, process, tools, culture, governance, change management, data, and analytics. In other words, the consulting profession's answer to resilience is to create a new and better op model. pardon me if I'm underwhelmed, because redoing the op model seems to be the consultant's answer to just about every business problem. We can debate the efficacy of op model designs and redesigns on business problems writ large, perhaps in my next book about the consulting profession. However, what's undeniable is that building a resilient supply chain will take more than 10-word answers or op model designs in PowerPoint. Moreover, many of the recommendations look great on paper, such as, quote, don't single source, unquote, or, quote, move manufacturing locations near/onshore, unquote. Great in theory and in boardrooms, but far more difficult in practical terms. More importantly, this does not make any enterprise more resilient. More maddening is the bevy of suggestions that call for some combination of creating network visibility, KPIs, real-time monitoring, predictive modeling, playbooks, and the like. Then there are the suggestions to integrate resilience into every supply chain function while building, quote, strategical, tactical, analytical, and digital, unquote, talent. But my favorite is creating a culture of resiliency by, quote, winning the hearts and minds of employees, unquote. I want to print out all of these white papers, bind them in a book, and then burn them as an effigy to excise the demons of mediocrity. Recognizing that I would be perpetuating several levels of environmental damage by doing that, I will simply take the downloaded PDFs of these quote-unquote resilience playbooks, drag them into the trash on my computer, and empty it. With those demons excised, we can now get to the task of building resilient supply chains. The first order of business is to get good at risk management. Sidebar: Tyranny of the Obvious, 5-point plans. I have created random 5-point plans from all the white papers. These are mixed from multiple publications. For complete listing, see the appendix. Perhaps it's not fair that I took them out of context. However, each of these recommendations seems extraordinarily obvious. I wonder if the authors could even pick out their recommendations from the others. Maybe the better question is, could ChatGPT come up with the same answer? Random 5-point plan number 1. 1. Optimize inventory. 2. Embed intelligence to learn from buying patterns. 3. Add distribution partners. 4. Increase capability. 5. Identify and classify third parties. Random 5-point plan number 2. 1. Embed AI into procurement platforms. 2. Design and implement a robust supplier security management strategy and processes. 3. Exploit data and emerging technologies. 4. Build resilience to absorb and avoid disruptions. 5. Use predictive analytics based on previous events. Random 5-point plan number 3. 1. React to threats and disruptions. 2. Mitigate risks proactively with prescriptive analytics. Build end-to-end capabilities. 3. Convince suppliers to shift production. 4. Qualify backup contract manufacturers. 5. Design and implement solutions that help alleviate vulnerabilities. Random 5-point plan number 4. 1. Reshore/regionalize. 2. Optimize raw material inventory. 3. Reallocate sourcing among supplier locations. 4. Qualify new suppliers. 5. Utilize multi-tier data sharing and collaboration. Random 5-point plan number 5. 1. Improve processes in planning, sourcing, production, and distribution. This wins the award for the most useless recommendation. 2. Reduce risk to an acceptable level. 3. Drive leadership accountability. 4. Encourage learning communities. 5. Create visibility into the extended supply chain. Living in a FUD, VUCA, BANI world. I am on record as hating lazy consulting. Perhaps the most egregious example of lazy consulting is the pushing of fear. This is not limited to consultants alone, but also solution providers, analysts, pundits, and the like who espouse fear-based narratives. This explains why we have various frameworks for dealing with the chaotic nature of the world. First up is fear, uncertainty, and doubt, FUD, which is common in security. Next, there is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, VUCA, which traces its lineage to the U.S. Army War College in the late 1980s. Now, there is brittle, anxiety, nonlinear, and incomprehensible, BANI. This alphabet soup of acronyms is enough to stoke the fires of angst, panic, and concern. However, generating fear based on society's collective anxieties and traumas simply to sell software and services seems opportunistic at best and pernicious, if not unethical, at worst. And yet, this is the lifeblood of the risk management space and the others who provide solutions and services. The more FUD, VUCA, BANI we create, the more clients feel like they need us. If you don't believe me, download the oceans of white papers or LinkedIn posts put out by consulting firms. The entire security industry was built on this paradigm. One of the most eye-rolling calls I endured was listening to a bunch of consultants getting on the phone as part of an exercise to predict the next big disruption, so they could develop a solution around it before it even happened. The entire exercise was meant to identify a FUD, VUCA, BANI issue and peddle it with a corollary solution. Needless to say, I displayed less than collegial behavior. James Cassio, co-creator of the BANI framework, criticized VUCA as, quote, simply a depiction of our default condition. Declaring a situation or a system to be volatile or ambiguous tells us nothing new, unquote. This is why all those white papers read like visual white noise. It is worth noting that Cassio and his collaborators shift the discussion to 4 new concepts: brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible. These terms do a better job of describing why our current supply chains are broken. For example, the BANI creators define the B as, quote, a brittle system in a BANI world that may be signaling all along that it's good, it's strong, it's able to continue even as it's on the precipice of collapse. Brittle systems do not fail gracefully, they shatter. Brittleness often arises from efforts to maximize efficiency, to wring every last bit of value, money, power, food, work from a system, unquote. However, as good as it is as a descriptor, BANI, like FUD and VUCA, do little more than to explain the lack of resilience in our supply chain designs because of the vast complexity in moving supply chains across the entire globe. To see a great example of just how complicated today's supply chains are, look no further than Christopher Mims' book, Arriving Today, From Factory to Front Door, Why Everything Has Changed About How and What We Buy. He tracks a hypothetical USB charger on its journey from the docks of Vietnam to its final destination at a house in the U.S. state of Connecticut. Through the illustration of the USB charger's journey, Mims explores container ships, containers, port operations, Amazon, UPS, interstate trucking, and last-mile delivery. It's an incredibly poignant and illuminating mapping of today's global supply chains. Though not his stated intention, his book shows just how brittle supply chains are and how easily disrupted they can be. More to the point, there are so many third parties involved and handoffs between them that it is clear every supply chain is a soft target waiting to be hacked, stolen, or disrupted. Ultimately, it doesn't matter to me which framework you choose, or if you even use one. The key takeaway is that the frameworks explain why our supply chains, and perhaps the world, are continually in crisis, but they lack the how we fix it aspect. Therefore, I would like to offer perspective on how we fix them. To do that, looking at the disaster management space and using at least one of their frameworks is useful. The BOOM framework. All the purported resilience frameworks, op models, and PowerPoints are so focused on the idea that if you pull a set of levers, you can withstand any disruption. They also assume that there is a steady state of operations, then a disruption must be absorbed and acted upon. Afterward, things go back to a steady state. Unfortunately, that is not the world we live in anymore. If we want to talk about resilience from a practical point of view, there is plenty of great real-world experience and material we can use from the disaster management domain. Juliet Kayyem's The Devil Never Sleeps lays out a useful framework for disaster management. She and other disaster planners use the concept of the boom, which represents the disaster itself. She argues that the boom is inevitable. So disaster management work is left of boom, avoiding the disaster or minimizing the damage, and right of boom activities are what we do in response to the disruption. The boom approach is very useful if we're going to build resilient supply chains. If we assume that the boom is continual, as KM eloquently describes, quote, for there to be a start, it assumes a finish. For you to stop worrying, it assumes there was a time of unicorns and rainbows when days were carefree and weightless. I'm here to disabuse you of that notion. There is no finish line, unquote. To build true resilience, we must categorize our activities into left and right of boom. What investments, for example, digital solutions and people capabilities, planning, network design, redesign, stockpile sourcing, can we tackle before a boom occurs? For right of boom, what procedures do we have in place to react in a nimble way? Do we have real-time visibility as events unfold? Can we quickly enact or model alternate scenarios? How quickly can we switch supply sources or distribution networks? Readers may notice that some of these recommendations are the same as the laundry list of, quote, resilience 5-point plans, unquote. The ideas are relevant, but they lack the context and the how, which is what follows. According to KM, quote, disaster management is about being ready for any boom in any shape. This concept, known as all hazards planning, does not focus on one specific hazard, but instead all of them. This is crucial in designing and building the next generation supply chain. Left of boom, how we prepare. Left of boom is the planning we do to mitigate risk before it happens. To do this, we must build a strong situational analysis of our supply chains. This is where the hacking mindset comes in. We need to stop and take a critical look at our end-to-end supply chains and imagine where they may be attacked and how. Essentially, we want to break down our supply chains to their core components to rebuild them more securely. We have these functional silos of plan, source, make, and deliver, but as with any silo, we tend to hoard data and intelligence, which prevents us from seeing the total picture. When it comes to cyber threats across thousands of third parties, the hoarding of information in silos gives an unfair advantage to the adversary. Going back to the vaccine example at the beginning, think about all the information silos and the various handoffs. All an attacker needs to do is insert an attack, physical or cyber, at any stage, and it will carry through undetected the rest of the way. A key question to look at in left of boom planning is, how are we applying lessons learned from the past? What are the known risks we have encountered before? This includes risks that companies regularly face, such as inflation, political instability, and supply shortages, just to name a few. Companies have strategies for addressing these, we hope, and can enact them once they occur. And then there are emerging risks, events that you should be looking into but are currently not. A good example of this is industrial control systems. If you have responsibility for any third party that relies heavily on industrial control systems, you should be very worried. There have been 2 very high-profile successful attacks on industrial control systems, the same controllers your third parties use. Iran's nuclear centrifuges were attacked by software worms, the Stuxnet worm, that were introduced into the industrial control systems to force the centrifuges to break. In 2016, Russia took down Ukraine's power grid using the Destroyer tool to thrust Kiev into darkness. Both of these examples were state-sponsored acts of aggression. However, the same tools deployed could be pointed at any industrial control system. Industrial control systems are notoriously insecure, and yet few risk managers, CIOs, category/commodity managers, and supply chain leaders are examining the weaknesses and making them more secure. Indirect suppliers can cause similar catastrophes. The software as a service, SaaS, solutions that many businesses rely on also introduce risk. For example, I had a client confide in me that they put a significant operational capability, along with related customer data, into a SaaS provider. The company did all the upfront due diligence, security questionnaires, and quarterly and annual business reviews. In short, the decision makers performed the risk theater as well as actors performing a Broadway play. Then the tech company decided to shut down with only 60 days' notice. The enterprise had to make a multi-million-dollar investment to shore up the SaaS company so that the business could buy enough time to figure out an alternative plan. Sadly, this is a common experience. In fact, a consulting firm I am intimately familiar with had the exact same issue. The natural reaction is to say, don't use startup SaaS platforms. But of course, that doesn't work either. The breakdown was that everyone communicated that everything was great until it wasn't. This is why we need to take a critical look at these relationships and find the points of vulnerability. We need to know what we don't know. Going further, enterprises must prepare for the boom across the entire supply chain ecosystem of third parties. It's not about the single threat, but how any threat can disrupt our operations. You can't focus on cybersecurity while ignoring physical security. We must look at who is attacking, what they're trying to get, and what's the probability and likelihood of an attack. This is why left of boom preparation requires a holistic view of the risk of the third parties. Ultimately, left of boom preparation is a financial decision. How much money does an enterprise want to spend defending itself against potential attackers? We must weigh the trade-off of a risk between a disruption versus forcing the company out of business. Supply risk can be mitigated by simply stockpiling key components. This approach can be expensive, but can create a competitive advantage if you're the only one able to deliver in a constrained market. Similarly, companies will hedge commodity prices as a way of offsetting price fluctuations. Stockpiling and hedging are left-of-boom activities that mitigate known risks. Here's a quick guide of left-of-boom, adapted from security methodologies. 1. Who are our third parties and what risk do they pose, directly or indirectly? 2. What are the possible threat vectors? 3. What is the efficacy of the security controls we have in place? 4. What collateral damage could a disruption to this third party cause? 5. What are we not doing that we should be doing? To answer any of these questions, you must have someone or a team who is incentivized to care. If not, there is nobody with ultimate responsibility, and third-party risk mitigation becomes a matter of luck. Equally important in answering these questions is knowing who your third parties are and why they are in your system. In our complicated business environment of third parties, today's supplier is tomorrow's competitor or unwitting attacker. For example, your suppliers may be customers, or your customers may be competitor frenemies. This is why data mastery of your third-party entities is so crucial. Data can be overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. My data collection and governance example in the previous chapter seems so simple, but it's not exceedingly more difficult to do it for the enterprise. And the importance of strong data management simply cannot be overstated. Data is the lifeblood of left-of-boom preparation activities. Our ability to collect, process, and analyze third-party data helps us to better manage our third parties. And better management of our third parties improves our risk management posture. The real risk here is overcomplicating third-party data management to such a degree that we cannot effectively do left-of-boom planning. Right of boom, how we respond. Right of boom is the work we do to respond to and recover from the disaster once it occurs. What good is it to have all the fancy risk monitoring tools if nobody's looking at them? I've watched clients buy risk tool after risk tool only to watch them collect proverbial dust on a shelf. Yes, there are pretty dashboards created for review meetings and annual performance reviews. But what about daily operations? How are we applying the risk data to management? The even more important question is, what do we do with the data, especially when attacks are infrequent? Defenders have to be perfect 100% of the time. Attackers only need to get it right once, which is why risk is a collective endeavor. You may not be attacked today, but your competitor, strategic partner, or supplier might be. The natural response to perceived threats is to create change management and communication plans. On the surface, there's nothing wrong with these. We need to know what to do, whom to communicate with, and how to communicate during a risk event. However, these management plans often become a means to their own end. They exist simply to justify the resources to create them. How many middle managers justify their existence by creating resilience plans? Or worse, they hire consultants to develop resilient plans that will never leave the safe confines of a PowerPoint slide. If the disaster response plan is not operational, tested, and lived, it is simply a suggestion. Here's a good guide, again adapted from the security profession. 1. Decide who responds. When hackers breach a system, who cuts off their access? Who does this when it's a supplier? 2. Determine the responses. What do you do when the boom hits? Consider how you'll marshal the forces to protect the enterprise and ensure that you're not paying a fraudulent supplier. 3. Plan for recovery. How do you activate new capacity when the plant burns to the ground? What additional capacity do you have? 4. Understand past lessons. What can you do today to ensure that it doesn't happen again? For example, how do you ensure the FedEx delivery person is legitimate and not there to hack your keycard scanners? 5. Use your experience to improve your defense. Where can you share your experience more broadly with peers so that the industry can increase its collective defense? Also, consider reporting the attack to governmental authorities so they can extract retribution. If companies never report breaches, these attacks will continue. With the proper underlying cloud platform tools, intelligence, and people capability, we can operationalize disaster response into our daily working. As a matter of course, we can continually change our supply allocations to test the ability of one supplier to ramp up capacity, and we can proactively add more supplier capacity into our allocations. Some enterprises already do this to achieve cost savings for certain commodities, for example, changing formulations based on commodity prices. This needs to be expanded to the rest of the supply chain. Most importantly, we need to be able to make these changes with the push of a button. Automate systems to do so as AI gets more sophisticated. Even better, companies should invite third parties into the conversation. Reach out to suppliers with outlier behavior profiles and talk to them about it. If we don't know the details about supplier activity, we need to correct that, and soon. Additionally, we should be continually attacking our systems to see where they are vulnerable. Hire college interns to try to break into your systems. Have them see if they can insert fake suppliers into your payment systems. In other words, make it real. Take 10% of everyone's jobs and have them study and share new physical or cyber attack profiles. Or once a month, have the entire team create hacking scenarios and test them out. Create a hacking KPI to track found vulnerabilities. Use social learning to expand everyone's situational awareness. Start meetings by asking how many suppliers are in the system on a given day. What's the last login? What supplier has the longest duration since they logged into a system? Or ask what supplier is an outlier behaviorally. These are questions that help daily operations, but they also give you a leg up on disaster response because it is testing the same skills that will be required when the boom hits. Sidebar: why wars are not supply chain disruptions. When Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, the supply chain hype machine spun into action to talk about how this war was the next disruption. However, suggesting that the war is merely a supply chain disruption is a vast oversimplification. Ever since Russia's incursion into Ukraine, thousands upon thousands of people have been killed, tens of thousands injured or maimed, and hundreds of thousands forced to suffer incalculable hardships. This is to say nothing of the untold environmental damage exacted upon the earth. So it is a little disingenuous to simply talk about the impact of the Ukraine war on enterprise supply chains. It's a matter of perspective. Supply chain solution providers have thrown the Ukraine war around as proof positive to build resilient supply chains. While technically correct, it misses the broader context and diminishes the much larger consequences of war. Wars are armed conflicts. They reshape entire societies and alter the course of history. So while the Ukraine war has caused energy prices to spike and diminished the availability of fertilizer, among other hardships, please keep in mind that these are small problems compared to the pain and suffering, the direct effects of trying to stay alive in a war zone. Hacking resilience. 5 takeaways. 1. Avoid 10-word answers to resilience. 2. Building resilience requires a cultural shift. 3. Left of boom is the planning we do to mitigate risk before it happens. 4. Right of boom is how we respond and recover. 5. We should be continually attacking our systems to make them stronger.